Hi, welcome to Talking Text. Our passage is 1 Peter chapter 3 from verse 13. Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. Who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? Peter encourages these believers to be zealous for what is good. Paul describes in Galatians 5 the fruits of the Spirit as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law, Paul writes. And this is what Peter's getting at. He's saying, I want you to be zealous for good. There's no law against being good, about loving people, for being kind, for being gentle, for being self-controlled. Be zealous for these things. There's nothing stopping you from doing all of these things. There's no law against them. And he wants to encourage the believers to be zealous, to pursue the things which are good. But he does say you won't get off scot-free. He said you'll be persecuted for righteousness' sake. He says, but don't worry, you'll be blessed in that. And the reason is because you are imitating Jesus, who suffered for doing good. You are walking in the footsteps of Jesus. He says to them, have no fear, or do not let your hearts be troubled. The only way in which we can do this is through the way he describes, I believe, is when you honor Christ the Lord in your heart as holy. When Jesus is the centerpiece, when Jesus is the center of your affections, where he is the most honored, he's seen as the most beautiful and most holy thing. When your heart looks upon and longs for Jesus, that is when fear and trouble subside. And so he describes the believers' hearts like this: let your heart be set upon Jesus as holy. And he says, always be prepared to give an answer or a reason to anyone who asks you for this hope. Why do you have such a hope in Jesus? And the believer ought to have been able to give an answer for that hope. And of course, people will notice when your hope is not in your circumstance, but your hope is in Jesus. That's why they may ask. And he says, when you give this answer, always do it out of gentleness and respect. Remember that you're always answering not a question first, but a person first. And so show the same goodness and kindness and gentleness and love whenever you answer someone. He says, I want you to do this and know that sometimes even when you suffer for good, God still has a purpose and a will in it. He says, God can always work out his goodness and his will in our lives, despite whatever circumstance we are in. In fact, he says it's better to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. When we pursue God, when we do good, his will and his purposes begin to unfold and shape in our lives, and we can see the goodness of God unfolding more and more in our lives. So I want to ask you, are you zealous to do what is good? Is Jesus the centerpiece of your heart, the most beautiful thing to you? I want to encourage you to do that, to seek Jesus and to seek to do good. Thanks for letting the text talk.